Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison LaGrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison LaGrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. US President Donald Trump threatens the European Union with tariffs as soon as the 1st of February. EU officials say they are ready to respond in a proportionate manner. China's Navy commissions a new generation frigate as competition rises with the US and other regional powers. Beijing says the ship will play a vital role in enhancing the overall combat effectiveness of its forces. Shooting and explosions reported in the West Bank town of Jenin as Israeli forces continue their counter-terrorism operations in the territory amid a ceasefire with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Somalian forces killed 15 Islamic State terrorists in an operation in the country's Puntland region. Around 7 Somali soldiers also killed as improvised explosive devices used by ISIS fighters exploded when the troops entered their hideout. And West Africa's military-led neighbors, Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali, say a joint force of 5,000 troops will soon be deployed across the Sahel region to combat the rising Islamist insurgency. Hello and welcome. We begin with the key development that the world is trying to wrap its head around. It's the US President Donald Trump and his executive orders. Trump did not waste much time and signed a record number of executive orders on his first day of presidency. The over 200 executive orders signed indicate how U.S. policies under him will look. An executive order is a powerful tool used by a U.S. president which does not require congressional approval. Trump has signed a flurry of such orders on a range of issues from trade to energy to climate and immigration. Many of them are controversial, and their impact will not just be felt in America. They can change U.S. relationship with the rest of the world, which has reacted with unease. And it seems Trump's to-do list is also not bringing any good news for Africa. Many of Trump's executive orders will have negative impact on Africa. We have a list of some of them. Now, first is the suspension of foreign aid programs. Trump does not see foreign aid in the best interest of the United States. His executive order is freezing disbursement of all U.S. foreign development assistance for 90 days, pending a review. The U.S. is the world's biggest foreign aid donor, and a huge sum is directed toward Africa. Over the 2023 to 24 financial year, the U.S. said it had donated almost $3.7 billion to Africa. Now, this aid contributes to various nations, international organizations, and to TB and malaria as epidemics, as well as to the United Nations agencies. But now all of it will be impacted. From aid cuts, we move to tariffs. Under his America First trade policy, Trump announced plans to establish an external revenue service. It will be used for collecting tariffs, duties, and other foreign trade-related revenue. A major impact could be on AGOA. which provides African countries with duty-free access to the US markets for specific products. The plan is set to be expiring this year, but now there are doubts if Trump would renew it. Countries like South Africa could be majorly impacted, as its key exports like cars, wines and grapes could be in the crosshairs. Next is the executive order that can impact Africa. It's America's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. It wasn't surprising that this was among the list. In his first term as well, Trump signed an order to withdraw from the pact, a move the former President Joe Biden promptly reversed on his first day in office in 2021. The US is the world's second largest greenhouse gas emitter, behind only China, and its withdrawal from the climate pact could deal a blow worldwide. Now, speaking of withdrawals, Trump has also signed an executive order for the withdrawal from the World Health Organization. The US is the WHO's top donor and partner. The withdrawal of US funding will negatively impact the organization to identify and respond to emergencies across the world. It could undermine the efforts to bridge global health inequalities and leave African nations at a greater risk. And then comes the declaration of an energy emergency aimed at boosting oil and gas production in the United States. This will impact African oil and gas-producing nations like Nigeria and Angola, as cheaper American crude would challenge their market share. Then there are some other orders, like suspending refugee settlement program and ending the birthright citizenship, which could also have a negative impact on Africans. But what could benefit Africa is Trump's quest for mineral dominance. His executive orders also seek to boost domestic mining and minerals processing. American companies eager to ensure reliable access to rare earth metals and other critical minerals might increase investment in Africa. This could help to boost jobs and infrastructure. But overall, the opportunities for African nations seem low. How can Africa brace for the Trump impact? Now, for more on this, we have with us Phumlani Majozi, an author and political analyst who is joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure. It's great to be here again. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Now, Phumlani, how will the suspension of US foreign assistance programs affect African nations that heavily rely on aid for critical sectors such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure? Are there specific countries or regions that will be disproportionately impacted?
Well, no doubt there will be implications of Mr. Trump's actions with respect to that issue. I think this thing, it needs to be thought from a broader perspective, and that is, leaders around the world, many leaders, whether you're talking about in Africa or in other continents, there has been this, way of getting used to American sort of finances or American taxpayers having to pay for many of the global programs. And we are facing the reality now that really nobody should rely on the United States, right? That whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in Latin America, in Europe, as nations, we need to get our act together, right? And be able to come together and solve our issues or our problems. And that would include, when it comes to including things like financing, right, of projects, because this idea that we'll forever be relying on countries like the US, because it may be Joe Biden last time it's Donald Trump now, he has a different view. Another president is going to come through and have a different perspective. So things may change. So this poses a challenge for African leaders, for everybody in different nations, to do not rely on the US when it comes to financing of such things, or even from a foreign aid perspective. There has to be reform, there has to be wealth being created. And to answer your question specifically, yes, there will be an impact for sure. But then that impact, it's about how do we sort of what we learn from it as developing nations. How do we, come together to start our own initiatives and not be reliant on U.S. taxpayers' money or the
Yes.
U.S. government, I should say.
Right, and with Trump's decision to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement and the WHO, what are the potential long-term effects on Africa's efforts to combat climate change and to address public health crises like malaria, HIV and AIDS, and possible future pandemics?
Well, when you look at the WHO, the World Health Organization, part of what Mr. Trump has been raising for a while is that WHO is being used by some political powers around the world, specifically in his opinion, China, to advance some political interests, right? It's being used by China and other nations to advance some political interest. And he also says that they mishandled COVID-19, right? Or COVID, I should say, the pandemic. So that is those are his concerns when it comes to the WHO. And he has been critical of this organization for a long time, because remember, the US is the biggest financial backer of the WHO. About 18% of funding comes from the US, of the WHO funding. So that one involves a bit of politics, geopolitics as well. He's concerned that China is using WHO to advance its interests. And that's how we need to think about it. That's how we need to think as well when it comes to the whole situation. The Paris Agreement is also a very interesting one, because you will remember that Mr. Trump is not really into the green agenda. He's not really into that. He's a man who believes in fossil fuels, right? In using the natural resources, different kinds of, energies and fossil fuels. He's not really a believer when it comes to climate change sort of initiatives. Now, I must stress this. For developing nations, especially in Africa, where there is still a heavy reliance on things like coal or fossil fuels, and Trump's presidency might lift that pressure, right? Because Trump is not really pushing very hard when it comes to things like climate change or Paris agreements, as he's withdrawing from that, all those things. So there will be less pressure globally for a push on renewable energies, on green energies, and Africa is going to be part of that as well, experiencing that lifting of pressure for them to be able to probably even focus more on also fossil fuels to try and diversify their energies. And I express that because there have been some concerns by some people that this pushing through forcefully with the green energies and so on, we need to keep in mind that they are developing nations that heavily reliant on fossil fuels, heavily reliant on coal and so on. So how we transition from the old way of coal and fossil fuels into green and renewable energies, it needs to be done in a very smoothly and carefully.
Right. Phumlani, as always, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa.
Pleasure.
For our next story, we shift focus to South Africa. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is keen to visit the country. His office says South Africa is ready to welcome him. But Pretoria denies sending any formal invitation to Zelensky. Ukraine has long awaited an invitation from South Africa. It says that through diplomatic channels, it has received a confirmation that President Zelensky will be welcome to visit South Africa soon. However, it said timings have not been finalized. Zelensky is hoping to discuss the other details with South African President Ramaphosa at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week. However, South Africa says it has not confirmed Zelensky's visit yet. The president's spokesperson said discussions are on, but things are not yet finalized. Regarding Ramaphosa's meeting with Zelensky at the Davos summit sidelines, the spokesperson said it might not take place due to changes in Ramaphosa's schedule. He confirmed that Zelensky has requested a bilateral meeting with Ramaphosa. Zelensky is due to pay his first visit to Africa. Discussions regarding his potential South African visit have been ongoing for months, but they have not reached culmination. Ukraine has called Zelensky's South Africa visit very important. It says it will be key to discuss a potential strategy on how to press Russia on ending the war completely. South Africa leads an African peace initiative in Ukraine, and Kiev believes the country could push Moscow to secure the return of thousands of its children. It says Moscow had abducted and deported to Russia during the war. South Africa in recent years has grown closer to Russia. It has abstained from votes condemning Russia at the United Nations, hosting war games with the Russian Navy, repeatedly and publicly criticizing the United States, and even allegedly loading weapons and ammunition onto a sanctioned Russian cargo ship. South Africa is also part of the BRICS grouping with Russia. Despite South Africa's neutrality, Kiev says that Pretoria can help in brokering peace and facilitating the return of its abducted children. Ukraine has hailed the role of both South Africa and India for their participation in the peace process. It has highlighted the significance of the last year's visits to Ukraine by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, noting that both leaders were able to witness firsthand the consequences of war. But despite calls for peace, war in Ukraine continues, and the country's biggest ally, the United States, might not support it the way it did under the previous Biden administration. The current president, Donald Trump, and his vice president, J.D. Vance, have both advocated for ending military aid to Ukraine and forcing Kiev into peace talks with Moscow. Now, even if that means that Ukraine has to cede territory to Russia that is currently under the control of Putin's troops. Despite courting Trump, the Ukrainian President Zelensky has been trying to rally support from other key nations like India and South Africa, but it remains to be seen if Ramaphosa will come to Zelensky's aid. And moving on to Central Africa, where the March 23 movement, or the M23 rebel forces, have taken control of a key town in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the Rwanda-backed rebels have taken over Manova, a trading hub that acts as a supply route to North Kivu's capital, Goma. Manova is just 40 kilometers away from the provincial capital, and the fall of the town has allowed the rebels to encircle Goma city. Now, General Sylvain Ekenge, the spokesman armed forces of the DRC, after an intense exchange of fire, the Congolese army acknowledged that the M23 rebels made significant breakthroughs in the towns of Manova and Bweremana. Now, the capture of Manova marks the latest gain in a series of significant advances by the M23 rebels. The group continues to gain in eastern DRC since its resurgence in 2021. Earlier this month, the M23 fighters captured Masisi. Now, it is the administrative capital of the Masisi territory in the North Kivu province. The town of around 40,000 inhabitants is around 80 kilometers from Goma, while the fighting in the Sake Hills has put rebels within 20-kilometer radius of the provincial capital. The proximity of the hills to Goma threatens the army's control over the city. M23 rebels have captured the Goma city before. The armed group captured it briefly in 2012. Meanwhile, the Congolese armed forces blames Rwanda for supporting the rebels. They said that the Rwandan army and its M23 puppets are contained and pushed back in the area.
It's true that we are observing the ceasefire, but at least civilians should be assured that each time the Rwandan army fires on our positions or our population or displaced people, the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo have the right to react.
The Congolese armed forces added that they were able to take back a few areas around Masisi territory, including the strategic town of Ngungu.
We are in Ngungu because we heard that the Congolese military had retaken the city and liberated US. We continue to suffer because security is still not good and people continue to die.
Meanwhile, Rwanda has accused the Congolese army of refusing to hold peace talks with the M23 rebels, which has led to the recent escalation in violence.
The meeting did not happen because, again, it wasn't the appearance there that was the most important thing. It was what was taking us there and how it is being addressed. It was more important. Then there was insistence that we must go there and sign something, not even to have another discussion, because I don't think there was even need for gesturing that to happen. So that's what killed the summit. So it's not Rwanda that killed the summit. It's actually DRC.
The recent fighting has brought back fears of the past. It has cut off the routes leading to Goma, forcing people to take supplies on overloaded boats in Lake Kivu. The sighting of shipwrecks is common at the water body, and there is rarely an established list of passengers. According to the United Nations, the Eastern DRC is witnessing one of the world's most alarming humanitarian crises. The violence has forced more than 230,000 people to flee since the start of the year. The decades-long conflict stems from the armed group's bid to gain a foothold in the mineral-rich Eastern Congo. And our final story is about Africa's growing automobile market. With rapid urbanization, the demand for personal mobility is increasing. Once doubted by European and Chinese firms, Indian two-wheeler manufacturers now have the largest presence in Africa. Indian motorcycles now make up more than 50% of all sales in the youngest continent. And as demand for two-wheelers grows, more and more Africans are preferring Indian brands over Chinese and Western competitors. So how is India supporting Africa's growth story? Our next report has more details.
Africa is becoming the focal point of geopolitical push and play. From Russia increasing its military and economic presence in the Sahel region, the exit of colonial powers, to the waning influence of China, Africa is emerging as an important player and a vital partner. While Russian President Vladimir Putin has been successful in removing French and European influence in West Africa, China's once towering presence has been reduced drastically owing to Beijing's debt trap schemes under the guise of the Belt and Road Initiative. And as Africa emerges, it's looking for stable partner countries for its growth. Enter India. The world's largest democracy is increasing its engagements and presence in Africa. And leading the charge is a set of two wheels, a throttle, and the promise of a reliable and joyful ride. Yes, Indian two-wheelers have flooded the African continent. Once doubted by the Western and Chinese manufacturers, Indian automobile makers have gained the trust of Africa and dethroned some of the largest auto giants in the continent. Before 2020, the two-wheeler market share in Africa primarily belonged to China. However, in the last 2 years, India has captured more than 50% of the total market share, and there are a few Indian firms that are at the forefront. Bajaj Auto, TVS Motors, Hero MotoCorp, and Royal Enfield. Most recently, TVS Motors opened 2 stores in Morocco's tourist cities, Casablanca and Marrakech. Overall, India's two-wheeler makers have captured most of the market in several African nations. Indian motorbikes are sold the most in countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Angola, Morocco, Ethiopia, Uganda, South Africa, Ghana, Tanzania, and more. African buyers say they prefer Indian bikes over other competitors, particularly Chinese, and they have several reasons for this. First, Indian two-wheelers are cost-effective. They are reliable and durable, unlike Chinese products. Indian two-wheeler makers have opened production lines in African nations, giving locals employment. Indian brands have also trained local mechanics to repair the motorcycles. And Indian brands are using local talent to popularize their products in Africa. So how big is Africa's two-wheeler market? Two-wheelers are the most popular modes of transportation in the youngest continent. In countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana and South Africa, where urban mobility is growing, two-wheelers have become the go-to vehicles from students to business owners and even government officials. In fact, Africa's two-wheeler market was valued at more than $8 billion in 2024 and is expected to grow to $11 billion by 2030, making it one of the fastest-growing segments in the African continent. Nigeria has the largest market share with at least a $6 billion two-wheeler market cap. And with close to 2 million two-wheelers selling each year, Africa is the second largest two-wheeler market among other continents. So with Chinese and European brands losing popularity, Indian motorcycle makers are cashing in and empowering Africans to pave their own journey, one rev at a time.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
It's over! He's done it again! Unbelievable!
Oh, straight into the roof of the net.
Nice one.
Straight down the middle.
Hi, welcome to First Sports. I'm Rupa Ramani. Let's get started.